Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're joining us from. Very warm greetings from Arusha, Tanzania. The heat wave is spreading across the East African region, and hope you're keeping safe, you're keeping hydrated, and keeping healthy. My name is Gabriel Achaye, and we are profoundly honored to have you join this very interesting topical discussion that is exploring a field that is not only causing trouble across the region but in the continent, and that is a discussion on deepfake. Now, those of you who are tech savvy know that the deepfake revolution or wind is sweeping across the global sphere. And today, we would like to explore the legal, ethical, and societal impacts of this dystopian future. Now, to take us through this very noble discussion is our moderator of the day, that is Miss Catherine Kariuki Molika. Catherine is a partner at Africa Privacy and Legal LLP in Nairobi. She is a Kenyan lawyer and she specializes in intellectual property, telecommunications, media, and technology. We are quite honored to also have her serve under the Intellectual Property Committee of the East Africa Law Society. Interestingly, for those of you who do not know, Catherine is a certified public accountant and she obtained it from Strathmore University in Nairobi, and she also has a master's in business administration from the University of Nairobi. Catherine, we are profoundly honored to have you moderate this session, and you have our attention for the next 1 hour and 50 minutes. Thank you. And to you participants, our session is streaming on YouTube, and share the link with a friend so that they're able to join the session. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, and thank you for that introduction. I am truly excited to be moderating today's webinar. The subject is quite interesting, and as a member of the um, East Africa Law Society IP Committee, which I proudly deputize, and in which our chair, Sunday, is here also today as part of my panelists. I think it's an exciting and a proud moment for all of us to just be coming together to discuss on such emerging matters and how they affect our different practices. So as Sandy mentioned, most of the panelists, of my panelists today, are actually experts in their law firms related to this. Most of my panelists here are actually tech practitioners, and I'm proud to have them. And also, I'm quite excited to hear what they will teach us today. I'm looking forward to thought-provoking engagements. And to our audience today, we hope that you'll be engaging and that you will find the conversations that we have today quite insightful as we explore the profound implications of deepfake technology and how it's challenging traditional legal frameworks as we know them. Safe to say, we are about to dive into a topic that's quite fascinating, at the same time alarming, as we've seen the rise of deepfake technology and its far-reaching effects on legal, ethical, and society landscapes. To start us off, one of my panelists, Davis, will help us understand exactly what deepfake technology is about. But before we get into the details, I wanted to set the stage by sharing a short video which Dr. Kakoza shared with me earlier on today to just show us deepfake in action and to kickstart our conversations. So if you just allow me, I will share the video, share my screen and share the video. And then we can move from there. just let me know if Gabriel, just let me know if the video is visible from your end. For my audience. Sorry?
I can see it from my end. I don't know about the others.
Right.
There comes a time when we heed a certain call, when the world must come together as one. But there are people dying. Oh, it's time to lend a hand to life, the greatest gift of all. We can go on pretending day by day that someone somewhere will soon make a change. We are all a part of God's great big family, and the truth, you know, love is all we need. We are the world, we are the children, we are the ones who make a brighter day, so let's start giving. There is a choice we're making, we're saving our own lives. It's true, we'll make a better day, just you and me.
As you can see, I think that's a good introduction and start to our conversation today. That's pretty wild, right? And that's just a tip of the iceberg today. Imagine the implications of such a video, where you can see world leaders. They've given a depiction of the world leaders doing that song that is a well-known song, and as you can see how hyper realistic it is. That's what we'll be discussing today, and what are the implications on the traditional areas of law. So then what we've done today with my panel of experts is we've divided the conversation into various sections, which each expert in the panel today will be handling or delving into, so that by the time we're done, we've covered 4 different areas of this particular subject, and each of my panelists will cover. So today, my panelists are, we have Davis, who, as I mentioned, will start us off. And we have Dr. Kakoza Mwalimu, who is a resident panelist and is always teaching us and challenging our thought process. We also have Sunday Ndagmugoba, who is our chair for the Intellectual Property Committee. We have Pius. Pius is also a resident panelist in our sessions. Pius is happy to have you. And we have Kathy Mputhia, Dr. Kathy Mputhia. Welcome, Kathy, and happy to have you. So what I'll do, this time we'll change it a bit. So with each panelists, as they introduce what they'll be discussing, I'll also allow them to introduce themselves and let us know what they do in the context of today's subject and what they do in their different practices. So before I bring in Davis, and hopefully even as we go along and discuss, the different panelists discuss, I hope we'll be discussing real life examples of deepfake situations within the world. For example, those who are Kenyans, or even, I'm sure if you're East Africa, you've been following what happened in Kenya. I think less than 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, when one of our cabinet secretaries in charge of foreign affairs mistakenly shared a deepfake video, and even though later on they ended up pulling it down, but they had shared that deepfake video that falsely depicted a CNN political commentator endorsing Kenya's involvement in Sudan's peace efforts. And even over the years, we've seen, for example, I think it was around 2020 or 2021 in Uganda when we also saw the opposition leader. There was a deepfake video shared of the opposition leader. We've seen it happen in Ukraine when also the deepfake video was shared for the that involved the Ukrainian president Zelensky, where he was urging his soldiers to surrender. We've also seen, I think, a lot of defamatory videos shared relating to celebrities around the world. And I think what I've seen mostly like in my practice, which is relevant in my fintech practice, I've seen also a lot of cases of fraud where criminals use deepfake technology to, for example, impersonate a CEO's voice and defraud a company, an accountant's voice and defraud a company. And hopefully those are the things that we'll be discussing today. And without further ado, I'd really like now to bring in Davis, our first speaker. And as I said, David will start us off, break down the technology behind deepfakes. Davis, over to you.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Davis.
Thank you so much. My name is Davis Kiporir Store. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, currently practicing at Sympathy Advocates. Sorry about that. My name is Davis Kiporito. I practice at the firm of Sympathy Advocates. I major particularly on intellectual property, data privacy, and emerging laws, which includes artificial intelligence and other related laws. So what I'll be tackling in this today's session will be the underlying technology behind deepfakes, how they are created, and what makes them convincingly realistic, or what makes them convincingly real to the eyes of a common person who hasn't been exposed to any knowledge about deepfakes. So I'm sure we've all interacted with videos, such as the one which was shared earlier on. Indeed, it was really informative and can be used to create awareness on the implication of such videos depicting world leaders performing in a studio, of which we know in real life they might be not capable of even singing. We've also seen videos of world leaders addressing a crowd in languages that we know they are not conversant with. We've also seen videos of football stars and managers using local languages, suggesting that they are tired with their work, which we know that indeed they are not tired with the work they're doing. Oh, another instance is maybe we've also watched movies where we've thought to ourselves that it is indeed humanly impossible for one to have clones of 9 human beings that look alike. And thought to yourself what indeed is being used, or what indeed is being used to generate such videos. Though there is a difference between what is used in movies to create such clones, because there is a thin line between CGIs, computer-generated images, and deepfakes, the use of artificial intelligence. And finally, we've all received various notifications, either from banks and so on, trying to warn us about the dangers of deepfake and why we should be aware of deepfakes. So you must be asking yourself, what exactly are deepfakes? Though there is no agreed definition of the term deepfakes, deepfake means a video, audio, or a recording that has been created to seem so real, though they are not real, because it is through the use of a manipulated, artificial intelligence. So the technology used in deepfakes can replace the faces, which is called facial swapping. With facial swapping, it is usually depicts the facial expression of a person and also synthesizing the face and the speech of the persons. Another instance in the technology is called facial manipulation. So facial manipulation, unlike facial swapping, takes the whole character of a person's image together with their speech and a skin texture. So in this way, a deep fake can depict someone to appear to be saying something which indeed they did not say, or they never did that. For example, we saw in the earlier video that those world leaders were performing in a studio, which maybe they never met and they never performed in a studio. So the term deepfake originates from the term deep in deepfake originates from a system of artificial intelligence learning called deep learning. So with deep learning, the knowledge acquired to create such videos leads to the term deepfake. So the fake means that the video created as a result of the use of a deep learning system in the AI is what now is collectively known as a deepfake. On the technologies behind the deepfakes is that there are two components, major components used in the creation of deepfakes. And these two components in the field of tech and IT, they are referred to as neural networks. So particular to this session, the two neural networks that I will be discussing are the generative adversarial networks, also known as GANs, and autoencoders. So for generative adversarial networks, usually works with the mechanism of having another system, which is called a generator, that collects all the data of the person and attempts to create fake images and videos through learning from the data they have collected. So the generator tends to imitate what has been done through the data collected. So for example, if you collect the number of times you collect data from world leaders, the generator will tend to behave the way those people behave, either through by voice or any action. Apart from the generator is what is known as a discriminator. So a discriminator in this instance works to the effect that it attempts to generate that content a number of times so as to give something that will appear to be real and separate what will appear to be fake. So basically, it just separates what looks real and what looks fake from their perspective, from its own perspective. On the part of an autoencoder, the autoencoder works a similar way with the GAN, save for the fact that it deals with encoding the images, feeding them into their own system for the purposes of collecting the behaviors of the data collected, including the voice and so on. Then now the decoding aspect of the autoencoder will be removing what seems not to be compatible or what may tend to make it appear to be fake. So another part is how a deepfake is made. So with the use of either the generative adversarial networks and the autoencoders, the procedure number one in the creation of a deepfake is through data collection. As we've seen in the videos, like the one shared earlier, for you to come up with a deepfake, number one, you have to collect the data of the various persons you intend to use. So after collection of the data, you now move to the stage of training the AI model. So in the training of the AI model, as I had explained earlier through the use of a generator and discriminator, so the training will work to the effect of evaluating what content appears to be fake and what content appears to be real in its own perspective, so that it can come with a more convincing outcome. So after training the AI model, we now come to face and voice synthesis. So at this point now is when they start to train the model to make the facial expressions and the voice of the person match whatever they are saying. So at this point now is when the lip syncing are made, and the facial expression of the person are made to appear in a certain, to depict a certain action that the character featured in the video should be doing in that instance. And the final stage of creating of deepfakes is refining and enhancement, or basically the post-processing procedures. So the post-processing procedures is will be blending the faces of the characters in the video, color correction. Let's say there was something that the texture of the skin did not match what the creator of the deepfake wants it to appear. So apart from that is motion synchronization. So for motion synchronization, there are things such as lip syncing, facial expressions, and other gestures that the creator of the video would want the characters in the video to perform. So basically, these last stages of deepfake creation on a refinement and enhancement are basically for the purposes of achieving a desirable outcome in the content that has been created. So one might ask themselves, how do deepfake videos appear so convincingly realistic, or what makes them to be so convincing that a person who has not been exposed to other type of information to verify them will only believe that the content in the deepfake is indeed real. So part of the issues why deepfakes appear to be so convincingly real are that number one, there is the use of high resolution images. the images that have been used are the same quality that any other person would believe that indeed what has been created in the video depicts the actual person. And from the appearance, you cannot tell that it was fake. Another instance is that through the data collection process and the use of the generators and discriminators in the collection of data and training the AI model, the outcome is that there is a realistic facial expression of the character. So whatever the character says, whatever the character does, the facial expression will match whatever action the content tries to depict. Another instance is the motion accuracy, the accuracy of the motion. So like in the previous video that was shared, we could see that though the characters therein were singing and collaborating on using maybe a single microphone, which is an aspect that makes such videos appear so real, and in fact convince a person who has not been exposed to any other type of information prior to this, believe that indeed these characters met and they indeed performed in a studio. So another bit, what makes deepfakes convincingly real is that there is a continuous AI improvement. So the more technology advances, also there is a tendency of AI being improved from one stage to another. That is why the more technology evolves, the more it becomes harder for one to detect deepfakes. And with that, in terms of detection, that with the continuous improvement of AI, it becomes difficult to detect such materials of deepfake. Even though we see that when one wants to detect deepfakes, there is a challenge since the detection of deepfakes is not automated. And also the deepfakes are run through rigorous trainings. The rigorous trainings usually tend to see what appears to be fake. So the more and more technology goes on, the more complex softwares and systems are brought in place to make such technologies evade or be hard to be detected. So another thing that comes with the continuous improvement of artificial intelligence is that some social media have consistent standards. For example, there is a chance that one platform might not have maybe a regulation on detection of deepfake. So the standard in one platform differs from another. And that is a challenge, even though part of what makes deepfake videos appear to be so convincingly real. Sorry. So I believe with that, that marks the end of my take to this session with regard to the topic of underlying technologies in deepfakes, how they are made and what makes them so convincingly realistic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Davis. Thank you for laying a foundation to our discussion today. And thanks for that great explanation on how deepfakes are created and the evolving technology behind them. And thank you for simplifying it's quite a technical conversation. Thank you for simplifying that. And I think we've gotten to at least understand to form a basis of the conversation that we're going to have. And we've learned that deepfakes are hyper-realistic, AI-generated videos, images or audio that appear as though someone has said or done something, which they actually never did. And thank you for also touching on what our next panelist is going to cover, the issue of intellectual property and intellectual property rights, and also how it's challenged the legal principles as we know them. So let's move on to intellectual property side of things with Dr. Kakoza. And we are curious to hear your take on how deepfakes challenge IP protections or even IP as we know it, especially regarding unauthorized use of someone's likeness. And Dr. Kakoza, don't forget to introduce yourself and say what you do in relation to today's subject. You can also tell us your favorite food before you start teaching us. Over to you, Dr. Kakoza.
Okay, thank you, Catherine, and good afternoon to our audience present. It's always a pleasure to be on the East African Law Society webinars. As I said earlier, that it's always an opportunity for me to also learn. Yes, my name is Anthony Kakoza. I am both into academia, practicing with the law firm of Biencha Kihika and Company Advocates here in Uganda, as well as teaching intellectual property law at Makerere University, Uganda Christian University as well, and a few visiting professorships abroad. And I've also had the opportunity to teach cyber law in a few other universities, but also currently at Makerere University. As to my favorite food, maybe I'll skip that because I'm not a person of particulars. I enjoy anything that's placed in front of me to eat, as long as many local food, that is. Yes, but something that I'm a bit of a nerd on is intellectual property work. I'm always fascinated by the creativity of the mind and what comes out of it, but also more so that this is an area of the law that is ever growing. So as it grows, we're also trying to always learn what we can out of it. And the challenges that come in, mainly in the area of artificial intelligence and what it breeds, deepfake is one of them. So my topic, which I'll get to shortly, let me see if I can share my screen. I hope you're seeing my screen now. Yeah, okay. My topic is on deepfakes and intellectual property, looking at how we can fascinate ourselves around this area and what we can pick out of it. So I won't go so much into what it is. We've already heard about the definitional side of deepfakes, but what does that relate to with intellectual property? There's the good and the bad. So I'll start with the positives in the few minutes that I've been given. I don't want to overstep my time. So there are a number of good things out of it. And if we position this within intellectual property, the creativity of the mind, now that we're using deepfake to create or to come up with content, some of the good things that we've seen so far since deepfake started way back around 2016, 2017, you can have new forms of storytelling. If you have someone who's been physically there and telling a story, but is not able to be physically with those that receive stories, maybe children, you can create a fictitious or an avatar of sorts, or a deepfake created image to tell that story that will look like a live form, and that serves its purpose. Deepfakes have also been, I was reading some of the case studies on them about some students in, I believe it was China, where the professor said they had been going through some, it wasn't China because China hasn't had this. It's some Asian country where they've been going through some Zoom fatigue. And the professor engineered a way in which they were in a virtual classroom and looking at one another when they were actually not there. So they used a deep fake related technology to come up with such a virtual classroom, and the students enjoyed it, and they've been using this ever since then. So education experiences also serve as a positive side of deep fakes. The other one is recreating music. We've had instances where, for instance, as you can see on the screen, Lisa Marie Priestley has had at least 4 collaborations with her dead father, Elvis Presley. He died back in the, I believe it was the late 50s or early 60s. Lisa Marie Priestley died in the 2000s, but prior to her death, she did 4 songs using deepfake with Elvis Presley. The headache behind that is now, how do you protect that in the copyright realm? Because copyright protects works that are in fixation, and you look at originality, because the duration also matters. But now, if you have someone who's long dead and you're resurrecting the person through a deep fake technology, how do you engineer a copyright legal regime to protect such works? There's no law for that yet, and I am very keen to see how that will be regulated in the future. But then there's also the negative side, and I think that's what expands our debates even for this afternoon. Mainly the fact that even with the first deep fake that was created, it was serving a negative purpose, which was to malign certain individuals. So the majority of deep fakes, in fact, research shows that up to almost 90% of deepfake cases have been on harassing celebrities or coming up with negative elements of celebrities, as you've heard from the previous speakers, and even Catherine set us starting off on this webinar about how people have been using it in a political settings, but also in pornographic films. I remember a case, I think it was in Rwanda a few years ago, where a person in the opposition in Rwanda, they used a deep fake pornographic scene of such a person. But then, like I said, the first case was about the 2017 Reddit user who imposed faces of celebrities on pornographic videos. We've heard of Taylor Swift, we've heard of Kim Kardashian, and many other celebrities having their faces superimposed on pornographic movies. Then, of course, face swapping, that has also been mentioned here. Manipulation of facial and vocal features. It's the fact that one's face or visual simulation is easily accessible to anyone. Right now, you're looking at my face. If someone has the technology behind them, they can just grab that fixation of my image and my voice and then superimpose it elsewhere. There's one interesting case I had of a few weeks ago of someone who was called on to a Zoom meeting by his CEO and finance manager that they needed to discuss issues related to accounts for that company that this person belonged to. So the person sat in the meeting and he did most of the talking, revealed a lot about the data related to secret information related to this company, and he gave away information thinking he was talking to the company's CEO and the finance manager, only to realize later on that this was a deep fake connected Zoom meeting, and the company was defrauded of millions of dollars. This is a real life experience, something that really happened. So there are quite a number of risks out there that go with privacy violations as well. And of course, reputational harm is another. We've talked about the political misinformation. I won't go back into that. So how does this all relate to intellectual property? First of all, it's connected to generally personality rights. And with personality rights, we're more so looking at image rights, which of course are not about creativity of the mind, and therefore we can't say that image rights are generally intellectual property. But someone who generates their bread and butter out of the image can't decide to trademark that that image in one way or another as a mark. So you mostly have these protected as trademarks, or if you simply pose it on some medium or fixation one way or another, then you also have copyright coming through. So copyright and trademarks are the closest intellectual properties connected to image rights, and therefore connected to the likelihood of deep fakes touching this area of the law. And most of the scholarship out there, the legal scholarship, turns to Indian cases, actually. There's an interesting one of Rajagopal versus State of Tamil Nadu, where you have a publication company or a media company that wanted to relay a story about how a local government institution had been in cohorts together with the local police and gone through some corruption tendencies and cover-ups of a certain person who was later on apprehended and given life imprisonment. And that person is called Otto Shakur. So they call it the Otto Shakur case. So that local government, as well as the local police, wanted to prevent the publication company from running this story. And the courts held that no, the issues of defamation or covering up the images wouldn't count in this matter. Public interests were more important, and therefore the publishing company was right to write a story about what had happened. But the court went on to say that as far as that person is involved, he has a right to control the commercial use of his identity, including his life story. So you catch on to that specific principle that a person has the right to control the commercial use of their identity, including their life story, and you relate it to someone who wants to use your image, your aura, or your voice for the sake of creating something commercial through a deepfake entity, through a deepfake situation, then you would have a personality right issue there being infringed upon if that were to happen. So the two specific types of personality rights we're talking about here are the right to privacy, where you have an individual having control over their personal attributes, preventing unauthorized usage. And then on the other hand, you also have the right to publicity, which is all about preventing unauthorized use of an individual's persona for commercial benefits. And the emphasis is on commercial benefits. So again, we also look at another interesting case from India of an Indian celebrity, an actor, Anil Kapoor, who successfully sued a company called Simply Life India that had been trying to use his persona and created deepfake videos. And the court said that, look, that's not right. That's unauthorized and it shouldn't happen. So the case went in his favor. And the court was actually also ruling that such unauthorized use violated his personality, his publicity rights, and therefore he had the right to authorize whoever wanted to use such an image of the person, as well as endorsements of the sort. So that would help, being an Indian principle, that we can also apply it through common law settings within the East African legal regime. So how do we build up a case against deepfakes? As far as intellectual property is concerned, which is actually a limited area for deepfakes, we could argue on the one hand that deepfakes infringe moral rights of a public figure. I mean, the right of attribution, if you say that has not come from me, the use of such an image, I didn't authorize it, or you're wrongfully depicting me as a person, then that's an infringement of my moral rights. But they can also be considered as passing off when you turn to the element of trademarks or unregistered trademark is a passing off cause of action that you'd have, where a person's name, image, or attributes, in as long as they create a goodwill for that person, such a person uses his name, his image, or attributes for commercial purpose in the bracket of trademarks, then you would be arguing for a passing off situation. For anything associated with an intention to deceive or make people believe that such a person has endorsed the use of their name or image. So the case for passing off requires a demonstration of goodwill, just as I've said, in the sense that the public figure's image or goodwill has a commercial implication in a specific jurisdiction where you want to raise such a cause of action. And what are defenses? When we turn to the other side and maybe argue a devil's advocate, what would you expect from a likely defense? And the most forefront defense is, of course, the freedom of speech, that hey, I have a right to express myself through this deep fake video that I've released. Focus on the message being relayed through that. That could be a freedom of speech argument as well. If political figures come out and argue that we're not too happy, or I'm not too happy with my image being portrayed through a deep fake video, that is quite a slim argument, because political figures are expected to be in the public eye at all times. There is a former French president, Sarkozy, who used to sue anyone that would come up with images of the French president. And in one of the cases where he sued a company that came up with a voodoo doll that depicted his face, the judge stated that the president needed to get a sense of humor. So it's very difficult for political figures to argue not just deep fake, but the use of their images. It's a narrow argument that they would present there. Courts recognize the public's right to use their images, and courts also recognize the public's right to information. Then you also have the fair use exception under copyright law, breaking it down to de minimis, or very limited use of someone's image, for instance, or if we're to say that the purpose and character of the use is not related to what it's normally used for, or if you're to say the nature of the work that has been used is different from what is depicted by the plaintiff in such a case, or if you say that the effect or the potential market is different from yours, then fair use becomes a good argument to rely upon. It's the fair use breakdown is evident in many of our copyright laws across the East African community, and has been used as a defense in many situations, even for parody, which I'll be talking about in a moment. Then as a defendant, you could also say there's no confusion, or there's no identifiable association with what the plaintiff depicts as his image. From, for instance, the video we started with in this webinar, I mean, no one in their right sense would believe that the North Korean president was in a music studio with any of the other presidents, or the prime minister of Israel couldn't have been in a music studio with the Iranian president. I mean, all this is depicted as deep fake, so we look at it as something to just laugh about, or we can't really associate the actual people with what we've seen on the screen. So in that sense, there's no violation of their actual rights. Then when you look at deep fakes, the majority of them are not really about actual exploitation. It can be just to relay a certain message, or it's something that you may use in a personal blog, or just to bring out something to laugh about, which is parody or satire. So that comes out as a good defense as well. So focusing it then down to parody, this is recognized as a legitimate form of creative expression, because it's mainly just serves the purpose of fun or laughter. It falls within the three-step test of what we know as copyright exceptions. We see this in Article 9 of the Berne Convention. We see it in Article 13 of the TRIPS Agreement, where you don't have a conflicting use, you have a special case, you have no way in which you are abusing the legitimate purpose for which the original work is used, which in this sense is my face, that the way I use it normally is different from what we've seen in a deep fake, which is not something that cuts across all the places. You may have a deep fake that relates to what I normally do, so that could be an exception. But the general position then is the deep fakes can be taken as just parody, and that comes across as a good defense. Parody has also been argued as transformative use. If I'm modifying the original copyright work to create new content different from how it has been used in the past, then that can also be a defense. But it would not be a good defense if, again, in my transformative use of the copyright work, I did not seek your permission, because authorization is quite important in copyright works. So those are some of the defenses. But like I hinted upon in the beginning, IP is not normally something you would jump to in argument over deepfake usage. Or if you're saying that someone has created a deepfake out of my IP work, that is not the I wouldn't advise that as the biggest or as the most important approach that one should take. There are better options to fight out a deepfake situation. The East African community has strong cyber legislations across the member states on computer misuse. Touching on those to tackle deepfakes is probably a better option. Data privacy and protection laws are also a better option to use. As we've heard from the previous speaker, that deepfake starts with input of data. So if that data has been imputed in a way in which you're violating one's privacy, then use the legislation on data protection to argue for a breach of privacy here. And then, of course, there's common law. If we turn against, or rather turn to outside of legislation, to common law positions on tortious liability, issues related to defamation. If I've been defamed in one way or another, my reputation is harmed by a deepfake video that was sent out. Also, if we look at the fact that it's not the truth, what has been relayed, and it has hurt my image or my reputation, then we could use the law of defamation as a better avenue. And turning back a little bit to cyber-related legislations, we should also think about liability on the service providers through which the deepfake messages are relayed. How far can we place liability on them? It's not a given. It's not something that should be taken for granted, because most of the legislations within the East African community use the same principle that ideally or generally service providers or internet service providers are generally not liable for what happens on their space. But such liability kicks in when they have been informed about infringing material being spread through their channels and they do nothing about it. Then that's when they would be liable. So that's the extent at which I would say there are better or alternative avenues that one can use to tackle the deepfake revolution and the risks that it presents. So thank you. That is all from me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of the webinar. Back to you, Andre.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kakoza. Mwalimu, every time you come on, we always learn new things, and you always leave us very provoked, our thoughts very provoked. Thank you for that insightful perspective on IP in the age of deepfakes. And I'm really grateful that you've linked the traditional principles of IP, such as, passing off, infringement, this emerging area, and trying to link the emerging issues with the traditional principles. And I like how you've connected or considered how these issues intersect also with traditional defenses that we know, such as concepts of freedom of expression, the right to free speech, and parody, the copyright exceptions, especially when it comes to defamation in the digital age. I like that you touched on, the avenues that can be used in this day and age on what is available legally that we can, to address any issues brought up in the deepfake revolution from a legal perspective, that we can address it using existing cyber laws. For instance, I know many jurisdictions within East Africa have, a version of one version or the other of a computer misuse and cyber crimes law. And within that context, you brought up the issue of maybe those laws should be amended or looked at to address the issue of liability. You also mentioned that it can be addressed using existing data protection and privacy laws, which is very interesting and alluding to what Sunday will be touching on next, especially given that Sunday, Tanzania, I think must be the newest country in setting up their data privacy office. Hopefully you'll tell us a bit more on it. Dr. Kakoza, you also touched on the fact that it can also be addressed using existing IP laws, for example, defamation laws. And maybe later in the Q&A, I would love to hear what your thoughts are on to what extent IP laws then should be overhauled to address these emerging issues, for instance, the issue of deepfake. So now let's shift to privacy and data protection. Obviously, with our first two speakers, David and Dr. Kakosa, the one thing that they keep mentioning is the use of data. And part of this data, there's an aspect of personal data that's used in some instances, like, your image, likeness. And obviously, so then data ends up being a fundamental or plays a crucial role in the subject of this deepfake issue. So Sunday, we look forward to you telling us how deepfakes violate privacy rights and defamation laws and what can be done to address these issues. So over to you, Sunday. You can introduce yourself and tell us your favorite dish, and then over to you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. So I know Dr. Kakosa said no to his favorite dish, but I will go out there and say that I love ugali. I'm not sure if you know of ugali. So ugali and beans. So that's like stiff porridge and beans. It's one of our favorite foods. We normally have it like every other afternoon. So yeah, but
That's a fantastic dish.
it's a brilliant one. I kid you not. So yeah, just to sort of dive in. Yes, yeah. So my name is Sandy Namgoba. I'm a partner at a law firm called Drive & Co, based in Dar es Salaam. We have an office in Zanzibar, Dodoma, and Arusha as well. My practice is a corporate and commercial lawyer, but I head the IP and tech department, of which this subject is like my baby. I love talking about privacy, data protection. The clients I present mostly are fintechs, so we deal a lot with how they can minimize risks, how they can look into data that they use, the cross-border transfer of data and the likes, their licensing in terms of payment systems, all that stuff. So I'm happy that the two presenters talked about or like lay the foundation of now that we know what deepfake is, and that the fact that it relates to manipulation of images, audio and video, and now that also narrates into other areas of law or rights such as privacy and personal data. So when we look at how deepfakes violate privacy, in my experience with the clients that I've worked with, and with our current laws that are now in practice in Tanzania, when we look at how personal data is used in an unauthorized way, facial images, voice recording, of which I used to create deepfakes, and they misuse that private information to fabricate false narratives, of which now would lead to reputational harm and emotional distress. But further to that, it goes to bespoke of cybercrime act, where now there is identity theft, where now deepfakes can falsely portray an individual in a very, let's say, compromising situation, of which could lead to defamation, but they can also be used to impersonate an individual. Now, that can be for fraudulent purposes, it can be for identity theft or something else relating to that. Now, when you look at privacy rights, when you look at data protection, particularly in Tanzania, where I'm coming from, we have the Personal Data Protection Act of 2022, and we have its regulations, which is the Personal Data Protection, Personal Data Collection and Processing Regulations, and the Personal Data Complaints Settlement and Procedures Regulations, which came out in 2023. Now, they provide a framework for protection of personal data, but also when you look at what they provide and the topic of the day of the deepfake, you come to realize that there is a lot that perhaps has not been done but can be done, but we can still use in terms of seeing on how we can now counter deepfakes. So our law, for example, requires consent for data collection and processing. but also imposes other obligations when it comes to data controllers and data processors when now they are collecting data and processing that data so they safeguard the personal data of the data subjects. So our Personal Data Protection Act could, I believe, potentially be able to address the issue of deepfakes, but especially when we talk of consent and the individual likeness, for example, that is used in like digital media, so that we can see on how we can control their personal data, especially when, let's say, they're using facial features, biometric data, times, and whatnot. So now that runs into what we call sensitive data. When they're creating deepfakes, when you look at the Personal Data Act and how these entities they have an obligation that is imposed upon them to make sure that that data is protected. Consent is sought. When you look at Section 30 of our law, in terms, especially on consent and lawful processing of data, it prohibits the processing of sensitive data, but also requires data controllers to obtain consent from the data subject before the data that is collected is being or is processed. So deepfakes at times, or more than not, they would use personal data without consent. But also when you look at Section 5, it outlines the principles of lawful data processing, of which includes fairness, transparency, and personal limitation. Now, deepfakes violate these principles by using data for malicious, or you could call unauthorized, purposes. But also we have what we call rights of data subjects, which in our law, they are catered for from Section 33 to Section 38. For example, Section 33 grants data subjects rights to access their personal data and request for their correction. So victims, for example, of data deepfakes can use this provision to identify and rectify those misuse of data. But Section 38 goes further to provide the right to erase, right of erasure, which now it's all, we call it the right to be forgotten, which allows the subject to request the deletion of their personal data. Now, this can be used to remove deepfake content from platforms. But there is also an obligation, like I stated, that is imposed upon the data controllers and collectors, especially under Section 27, that requires data collectors to implement security measures to protect personal data from unauthorized access, or you could call misuse. Now, failure to protect data can lead to misuse in creating deepfakes, of which now that is detrimental. But further to that, Section 27(5) also mandates, sub 5 mandates data controllers to report data breaches to Data Protection Commission and to the affected data subjects. Catherine, you mentioned of the Data Protection, Personal Data Protection Commission, of which we call it in short PDBC. It is in operation. It isn't. It's set up in Dodoma, but our act. Good thing is that because Tanzania is a union of two countries, Tanganyika and Zanzibar, so our act caters for Tanzania mainland and for Zanzibar as well, except for non-union matters. So they have an office in the mainland. We have it in Dodoma, but they have an office in Zanzibar, and there's a commission in Zanzibar as well. But the commission now has started registering entities and DPO, data protection officers, under its wing, so that it can monitor. But the offenses also that can come, so in terms of criminalizing unauthorized access and the use of disclosure of personal data, and where deepfakes comes in, and those who create deepfakes also misuse personal data, as I have highlighted, can be persecuted under this section. In essence, what we are saying is that since you have violated and your personal data has been used, and at times your sensitive data has been used, and it's your compromise, the law, if we use it in that sense now, it criminals, and you could be liable to pay up to, let's say, 2.5 or say million USD. But when we look at the other laws now, because we speak of defamation as well. There is what we call the Cyber Crimes Act, which now that also criminalizes unauthorized access to data and identity theft. And so potentially it can be applied in cases of when there is because they are criminal in nature involving deepfakes. For example, when you look at Section 5 of our laws for Cybercrimes Act of 2015, it talks of unauthorized access and interception, where it's unauthorized access of computer systems and data is an offense. And we know that deepfakes creators used to hack systems at times and steal personal data, and they can be prosecuted under this section. When you look at it as well, for example, in Tanzania, not so long ago, I think it was 2-3 years back, a very well-known politician and a pastor was subject of what you say deepfake pornography. That too, but also recently I saw there was one whereby Zelensky, president of Ukraine, was telling that or talking to his people that now they're going to have a ceasefire, of which now that narrates into what doctor was saying. There is so much that you can tell or you can tell, but then now identity theft and impersonation as well is a big issue, and our under Section 15 and Section 12 of the Cyber Crimes Act can be used to cater for that, because they prohibit the use of computer system to impersonate another person, but also they criminalize identity theft, including the use of another person's identity. So a person is not allowed and shall not cause loss to the property of another person by maybe inputting or deleting or transmitting computer-generated data. But deepfakes now use that they impersonate an individual for malicious purposes, of which now, looking at the law, perhaps we can use that route to prosecute. But defamation and false information as well, under Section 16, it prohibits any person who publishes information that is, or like let's say it could be a picture, text, or a symbol, or in other form that a computer system now uses, and such information is known to be false, or it could be misleading, it could be with an intent to defame or abuse or insult, or any other way that could perhaps make the public believe otherwise. So, or it could be like concealing as something else of which it is not. Now that could amount to an offense and is punishable to imprisonment and fine as well, or both. But just to wind up, when we talk of offenses relating to privacy, it's also the law prohibits the same. Deepfake creators, they can misuse personal data and can be prosecuted under the law. But also, since they exploit personal data, that can harm privacy. I know you have a lot of challenges, perhaps we get to discuss later. Especially for Tanzania and East Africa. I know other countries, like let's say in the European Union, when you look at GDPR, it sets out very good standard in terms of how someone's personal data, as if it is used, let's say, to create deepfake without their consent. Now that can be a violation. It doesn't say specifically in the regulations, but then again, there has been movement whereby now they are pushing for let's say, if you are putting in these platforms, you are using deepfake, for example, to portray something that is not, you have to acknowledge it. For example, when you look at the European Act that was recently passed, I think it was in May, if I'm not mistaken, or April, or we call it the regulation. It also addresses deepfakes by it being an AI system that generates or manipulates. So by the fact that it manipulates any video content or image, it must disclose the content where it that perhaps disclose the content that has been put there, and that is what was made by using artificial intelligence, and it is a manipulation. Other countries as well, I don't know, you look at the US, they have an act in the state of California. I remember India as well, they had an act in 2023 on digital personal data. So there has been movement, but I think the gap is still there. We need, for example, in Tanzania, to create laws now that would specifically cater for deepfakes. Even our act, I believe, needs to be changed for personal data to act for that. I know the AI policy in the making and the discussions around it, but I believe we need, it's high time that we have a law that specifically and clearly caters for and protects against these violations. So I'll end up there and we can take it from there. I think when we have questions or there is more to add on later, I can chip in. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Sunday. Again, for your presentation, very insightful. I've also learned something. I'm glad that you've linked the key principles of data protection, and I'm glad how you linked the discussion that we had with Dr. Kakoza on intellectual property and what Davis also introduced us to. The concepts that they've mentioned, we've seen how they mesh very well with data protection. And I like how you've highlighted issues within data protection, the concepts or key principles within data protection, such as consent, offenses. You've highlighted the offenses as well. You highlighted the obligations of the data controllers and processors, and the obligations that they have pertaining to any personal data that they handle, and also how use of what we regard as sensitive data. You also highlighted how data laws are interconnected with the cybercrimes laws, as well as IP laws, which makes this issue even more multifaceted when addressing or pursuing matters related to deepfakes. One thing that I've picked from you is that this complexity underscores the need for a lawyer handling matters related to this to be well versed in not just one area of law, but different areas of law, for them to be able to successfully handle their clients related matters in this issue of AI or deepfakes. I like how you touched on also the critical issue of identity theft, which is obviously central to many concerns raised by deepfakes, and how you highlighted what is happening in other jurisdictions, for instance, the European AI Act. You also highlighted what is happening within Europe. You highlighted the EU GDPR, as well as I think you also highlighted what's going on in US and India, which shows that it's a global phenomenon that's being addressed globally. And I like how you also highlighted the importance to probably also look at our local laws in our different levels. I know there's something that's also happening to do with AI regulation in Kenya, or guidelines. And I'm happy to hear that that's also happening in Tanzania. So hopefully our jurisdictions will be able to do something to keep up with the law. So we'll pick up with you again, probably in the Q&A forum, and I'd encourage our audience to post their questions in the Q&A section so that our speakers are able to look at your questions and answer at the end of this session. So now we'll dive into the ethical dilemmas surrounding today's subject. And Pius will share his views on the balance between freedom of expression and protecting individuals from the malicious use of deepfakes. Dr. Kakoza touched on this. And so maybe Pius, you will expand on this, and over to you. And don't forget to tell us your favorite food after you introduce yourself, Pius. Over to you. Pius? Pius, you're on mute. We can't hear you. So you'll have to unmute yourself and start again.
Sorry, put on the video and I forgot the audio. Sorry, I'm saying my name is Pius, although Catherine calls me Pius. My name is Pius Nazinda.
Sorry, it's my Kenyan accent.
It's fine. I'm used. So, yeah, I'm a lawyer based in Rwanda. I work with a law firm called CM Advocates. yeah, and I'm happy to be part of this discussion. Yeah, favorite food? Yeah, any local food works for me. Yeah, so the issue of deepfakes and media. I think it's as the previous presenter said, it's quite a challenging scenario of dealing with deepfakes, but then it becomes very difficult in this digital era where information spreads so fast and sometimes goes unchecked. So we know, I think the problem currently is that we have the traditional media houses or traditional media where you have organizations that are regulated, that have a proper way of doing things. But also we have, I mean, anyone, YouTubers, anyone who has a smartphone can wake up and they start uh, um, spreading information. So it's quite challenging. And I know Catherine asked about balancing the two, the freedom of expression. I know in the Rwandan context, we know the constitution guarantees freedom of expression. And I know it's common in other countries and especially in most East African countries. But also that freedom of expression has limits to that freedom of expression. For example, in the case of Rwanda, we under Article 38 of the Constitution, it says that the freedom of expression and freedom of access to information shall not prejudice public order, good morals, the protection of youth and children, and the right of every citizen to honor and dignify uh, and protection of personal and family privacy. So basically, I think our my teacher for constitutional law used to call those clawback clauses. You have a right to do something, but then there are limitations to that. So it's I think what I've seen that is challenging with deepfakes is the way you find even the people that you trust or the people that you thought could not fall victim to deepfakes are the ones that are spreading it. And I'd say in general, I wouldn't want to say that we are gullible, but sometimes because of the way the information spreads, it's very fast. What we get is what we consume and we take it as a truth. And people sometimes share this information, whether correct or wrong, without knowing. So, but for those that don't know and are willing to delete or even offer an apology, those ones you'd understand. But again, we also see people that are sharing for the sake of controlling a certain narrative. And they do it intentionally because they want to achieve a certain uh, goal. We would appreciate videos like the ones that like the one that Catherine shared at the beginning, one that is spreading a positive message. But in countries like uh, maybe not only our countries, but regions that are volatile like ours, where there are conflicts, it's much easier for spreading wrong information that is composed of deepfake images or deepfake videos uh, that cannot be controlled. And once it goes outside there, it's very hard to change the message that was contained. So what that leads to is we see a lot of misinformation and disinformation being spread. As I said, mostly sometimes it's done to manipulate public opinion or a certain narrative that is, if for example, the cases that my colleagues shared of the war in Ukraine, if someone is saying we've conceded or we've signed, um, we've basically we've given up on the war, then it's very easy. It sends a certain message, and it works in conflicts, it works in elections. I'm sure Uganda is gearing up for elections next year. So if such content, such deep fake images and videos are spread, then whoever has control over such things, or whoever has control over the bigger population, is in essence capable of changing the narrative. And we know a message like that can be shared on a family group, and your aunties from the village are spreading the message as if it's real. Most probably, it's hard to tell for most people, like I said, where everyone has a smartphone. It's very difficult to distinguish between what is true and what is not true. So it's very challenging, and this is something that needs to be confronted by finding the proper ways of handling deepfakes. And I think on my side, what I think should be done is, especially for regulated media or media organizations, to want to train themselves. I know even as lawyers, there are new concepts that come up daily that we don't understand. I think as Davis presented from the beginning, these are new things that we don't understand, and we might take time for us to understand. So everyone, not only the media personnel, but everyone should be able to understand these things. And before you can share something, you should be able to understand that what you're sharing is correct. And that goes with verifying the information that you're about to share, to know whether it's true or not. Additionally, the same way these things are made by use of technology, maybe we can see IT solutions that are coming up to challenge why I can easily put a video or a photo and it tells me that that's a deep fake image, or that's a deep fake video that cannot be shared. Additionally, we could also work on AI tools that are promoting ethical distribution or sharing of proper information. Again, so I think that's the way we balance the freedom of expression and freedom to share information with the need to avoid harm, to the need to avoid causing havoc. We've seen the consequences of sharing such images and such videos. We can balance it also if it's properly regulated, if our legislations keep up with the speed And I know sometimes it's very difficult to keep up with the speed at which these solutions or these tools come up, but sometimes we need to be up to speed with the tools that come up and see how we can properly regulate them. Thank you so much, Kathleen. I think the rest we can discuss in questions and answers.
Well, thank you very much, Pius. That was very insightful and very interesting as well. And thank you also for linking your discussion with what the previous presenters had brought out, what Davis, Dr. Kakoza, and Sunday brought out. Thank you for bringing out the issue of public manipulation. And I think it really rings home, especially in the context of Africa, where many people may not be aware of the existence of deepfake technologies and are not quite empowered to distinguish between, real and fake content. I like that you brought out the fact that it carries with it the possibility of being used, for example, in election season, and as you pointed out, for example, in the elections that are coming in Uganda. So we'll be watching that space to see what will happen. You emphasize the issue of harm and manipulation when it comes to the population, and how the issue should be addressed through regulated media and development of new principles to safeguard the public. I like that you highlighted the issue of balancing existing laws as well as emerging issues to just make sure that the laws keep up with emerging issues so that they're able to address any issues brought up by these emerging technologies. You also highlighted the crucial role of us as lawyers and the roles that we should play, for example, in raising awareness, as well as our responsibility in verifying some of these contexts before, say, sharing, and the role of government in maybe conducting public education to just make sure that people are aware. I liked that you also pointed out that each of us has a personal responsibility generally as citizens of and members of the society to verify information before sharing it. And I think finally you touched on the issue of use of IT solutions such as AI tools that can help identify deepfake videos or images that promote ethical use of information. So thank you so much, Piers, for bringing out those key elements, even in mitigating the harm caused by deepfakes. So that provides a very good forum to segue into now our final speaker, who is Dr. Kathy Mputhia. And Dr. Kathy, would like to hear your insights on the societal impacts of deepfakes and what regulatory measures you think might be necessary to curb their negative effects. And before you get into that, you can introduce yourself and also tell us what your favorite dish is. Over to you, Kathy.
Thank you, my namesake. My name is Kathy Mputhia, and I am an advocate in Kenya, proprietor of Simputhia Advocates. Simputhia Advocates is a Nairobi-based law firm that focuses on emerging laws, corporate governance, data privacy, intellectual property, and anything to do with emerging laws. So whenever there's a change in regulations or things like that, we got you. So our vision is to be a change agent in the business and legal environment. And it's very nice to see all the panelists and hearing and learning from their expertise. My favorite food really depends on my mood. So I do like a lot of pilau, biryani. I like spicy food, but that depends on my mood. Okay, so I'm going to be tackling the social, the societal effects of deepfakes and also the political, effects. And finally, I'll touch a bit on the legislation. I will be very brief as the last speaker, and especially because my predecessors have already talked a lot on some of the issues that we are going to be touching on. So, Kathy, I really liked the video that you shared. It was very entertaining. I was just laughing, and that is one that is one social that is one effect or societal impact of a deepfake. So if you look at that video and you listen to the words, that song was done around 1985, and it's a song "We Are the World." So I think if you look at the lyrics, it's about world, people coming together, people uniting, and people just spreading love and things like that. Now, depending on how you look at it. From my perspective, I found it very hilarious, seeing some people who are reputed to be dictators, and people like that singing that kind of a song. But somebody else may look at it from an aspect of motivation, from an aspect of a positive impact. So the first societal impact that really comes about with deepfakes is that they sway public opinion, and depending on the motive of the creator. So in my view, I think deepfake is actually a double-edged sword, because it can be used maliciously and it can be used to sway opinion in a negative way. And I'm just curious, or can I say worried, about upcoming elections in this region of ours, because before social media came about, before print media came about, you know that in the run-up to elections in some of our countries, social media was used to spread a lot of propaganda. It was used to, spread a lot of hate speech and so on. Now, with a technology, an emergent technology that can actually be used to spread more propaganda in a almost believable way, I think in terms of political usage, we cannot really write that out, even globally. You mentioned the video for this one of Zelensky telling his army to put down their arms and so on. You see, that is political manipulation. And I don't know what the motive of that creator will be. But we've seen it, politics and elections is a really dirty game, if you ask me. And there's a lot of malice, a lot of hate speech. And so maybe with this new technology, that can be one very, very negative and bad impact. Our previous speakers have said that, unfortunately, our populace maybe are not trained to distinguish between a real and a fake video. And I don't think it's just Africa. I think it's basically globally. And with that kind of swaying of public opinion, with misinformation, it can be really dangerous and it can be used in a very negative way. I was reading somewhere that in 2019, the Gabon case, that a deepfake video actually caused a big political upheaval in Gabon. And there was even an attempted, I don't want to mention those words, but you can finish the sentence for me. So that is how dangerous this thing, if it falls in the wrong hands, that is how dangerous it can be. When it comes to business, competitors and what we call unfair trade practices, I feel like some, competition between businesses can get very ugly, and you might find a malicious competitor using a deepfake video to actually sway the market in a certain way. You can imagine a video of a CEO in a compromising position or uttering some words which he did not utter. I can't remember the company, but it actually happened where the shares actually came down. The stock fell because of a deepfake. So it can really be used negatively by competitors. It can be used in corporate fraud. I think Dr. Kakuza mentioned it very well. I don't need to repeat the case. And I think the overall negative effect is an erosion in the trust in the news. So, you know, you might be watching a video and you're like, that's another deepfake. Yet the video is a real video. And like Dr. Kakuza mentioned, most of these videos are actually used in pornography and weaponizing of, is it the, you know, gender and so on. I feel like it can be used for gender-based violence, not physical violence, but you know, the non-consensual pornography video. And sadly, 96% of these deepfakes are used for that. So there was a case I was reading of a certain lady and her husband. They had a friend. This guy used to work in, I think, a coffee shop where they used to visit. Very nice guy. But this guy on the side, he made a pornographic video of this lady who was his friend together with that lady's husband. So he made very, very bad pornographic videos and posted them all over the place. And when it got to her, you know, her reputation had been harmed, her dignity had come down. But what she said is she suffered psychologically. This lady, till today, she's afraid of even leaving the house. So I feel like the victims of deepfake videos also suffer a lot of psychological harm. Now, whenever there's a breach of law, I feel that also has to do with societal impact because law is there to control and to regulate society. I do not need to get into what my colleagues have already said, but one that I can mention, at least our Kenyan constitution provides for the right to be treated with dignity. So a deepfake like that pornographic one, the non-consensual one, is also a breach of someone's constitutional rights. Other than the privacy rights, we have the constitution. And whenever there's a breach in the law, how I see it is like it's also a negative societal impact. People have talked of deception and impersonation and so on. Now, I feel like the evidence law, going forward, the Evidence Act, the standard of proof does not quite provide for deepfakes because, well, at least the Kenyan one, there are just two sections, and in my view, they're very general in terms of covering the emerging issues, even with deepfakes. So I feel also that deepfakes are very positive if they are used well. One, it can be used by a company to maybe speak to their customers and give customer experience videos. It can be used to educate people, especially if you have consent maybe from a public figure talking about an area, creating, you know, social awareness and so on. I feel it can be used for public relations if it is used well. It can also be used to spread a good message. And it was actually used in the US. There's this kid who was a victim of the Parklands shooting, the Parklands school shooting. He was called Joaquin Oliver, and unfortunately, he died in the shooting. But his parents, in collaboration with a media house, created a deep fake of him spreading a message against, you know, arguing for gun control. And you see that kind of message coming from someone who was a victim in this shooting, and you know, it evokes a lot of emotions, a lot of so on. I think it's a very effective way of communicating. In movies, deepfakes can be used for entertainment. I feel if you have consent from the actor and he consents to you using his image in a deepfake and so on, I think you can come up with very, very interesting movies that can be used. And actually, there are actors who've appeared in movies posthumously. I think James Dean appeared in some movie which I can't remember. So there's that longevity in terms of your image and so on. Now, having laid out the negative and positive impacts, I think the last thing I'm touching on is what are some of the solutions? I mean, this is a reality that is with us today. So regulation is the duty of the government and so on, but as individuals, as businesses, how do we respond to this? So I feel like one of the ways is having a good communication strategy and dealing with the deepfake immediately. So a deepfake is based on deception. And Kathy, I can see your video is on. I'm just 1 minute as I, I wind this up. If you respond in time to a deepfake, like you come in time and set the position correctly, having the communication strategies. Like that guy whose company lost 25 million US dollars because a deepfake was used. I feel like if there are proper control, verifications, maybe you ask, though you've asked us what is your favorite food. So now you ask that deepfake, by the way, what's your favorite food? And then, Apana here, this is a deepfake, having those verification protocols. In terms of legislation, but I feel just personally that there are a lot of piecemeal laws in which when you do the correct amendments, they can govern the issue of deepfakes. For example, hate speech laws can be amended to include generation of hate speech. The Evidence Act definitely needs just to be updated to come, to keep up with technology, to provide for a higher standard of proof for digital evidence. I don't know how they are going to do it, but maybe by partnering with technology experts, because these are the guys who have the capacity to determine the authenticity. And our judiciaries, people are going to be presenting evidence on deepfakes. So how are they going to uh, verify these videos are real? And I feel partnership with technology experts is very critical. We have to change how we operate because the world has changed. And as a legal profession, we need to be real and to understand that it is time to change. We can't continue in the same old methods. So I feel like partnership with the experts. Our professional bodies can have some sort of guidelines on production of digital evidence, law societies, and so on. I have so many things to say. If you could just indulge me for 1 more minute so that I don't rush through my presentation. Our criminal system can put in place very deterrent sentences for, like, that malice of maybe using a deepfake in porn and damaging someone. I feel that one should be given a very harsh sentence as a deterrent. And I was also thinking of piracy and anti-counterfeit measures. So Davis was talking to us about the softwares that are used. So the generators of this software who intended it for good can actually maybe use some piracy and counterfeit measures to sort of limit the negative use of their technology. Finally, the legislations, and I'll just rush through this. So while we don't yet have a standalone regulation, the US has a lot of regulation on deepfakes. So one state, Alabama, criminalizes creation of deepfakes for malicious use. Louisiana criminalizes the sale of deepfakes. Then I really love the Tennessee regulation, and maybe this is what we can borrow from. They have something they call the Elvis Act. And the full name of the act is Ensuring Likeness, Voice, and Image Security Act. And the provisions I would love to see is like that act, it gives people the right to control how their voice, how their image is used, especially if you're a celeb. But the most beautiful thing, it grants a post-mortem right. So even after death, there's some sort of rights that somebody has to their voice and to their image. And finally, I feel while we don't have a standalone law on deepfakes, there are still some existing remedies that we can pursue. For example, in torts law, the tort of impersonation, the tort of misrepresentation, data privacy claims because there's no consent, and so on, and even constitutional petitions around right to dignity and so on. Well, I could have said much more, but because of time, I think I end it there. Thank you so much.
Wow. What a way to end this panel. Thank you so much, Kathy. And thank you for bringing in new elements and also for meshing your presentation with what the previous presenters have brought out. I like how you've highlighted the social media propaganda in this day and age. We used to know of when they used to use tabloids, those publications, and how you've meshed it into now it's involved into a much more dangerous realm of, these hyper-realistic deepfakes. So I liked how you've meshed that. And I also share your concern about our region and the political climate, especially when it comes to use of deepfakes during elections. And as you rightly mentioned, deepfake technology is a double-edged sword, and we've seen how its misuse can lead to significant political instability, as evidenced by, you mentioned the recent situation in Gabon, which led to that political crisis that starts with a C. And I like how you also highlighted the positive aspect of this double-edged sword situation, how, corporates can also use this technology for a good thing to promote their businesses and things like that. And beyond politics, but I also liked how you mentioned the other side where businesses use some businesses use this technology unfairly to target its competitors and, facilitate corporate fraud, and how all this contributes to the erosion of trust, both in the corporate and public spheres, and which obviously, as you mentioned, are all serious concerns that we must address. I like how you highlighted the issue of that it can be used to perpetuate domestic violence, psychological harm, defamation, and also adding the element of breach of constitution to what the previous presenters had provided. And I like that you've highlighted the issue of our existing evidence laws, especially regarding the standard of proof and how we can relook at that, both from the judiciary aspect as well as from the lawmakers aspect. How can our existing laws address that standard of proof as well as liability? And I like that you highlighted the issue of, hate speech laws. Maybe we should look at that, or you can address it through that. Is it sufficient enough? And how you brought out the element of how also our professional bodies like, ELS, LSK, ULS can contribute to all these issues and bringing everything together. I like that you brought up a new element that you mentioned about piracy, also looking at it from a piracy and anti-counterfeit measures. What can be done? It can also be addressed through tort law, constitutional petitions. Thank you for highlighting areas that have addressed these issues. For instance, I think you mentioned the state of Louisiana, Tennessee, bringing in what you highlighted as post-mortem rights. And thank you for fusing everything together and bringing the whole conversation together. Ladies and gentlemen, one thing that's clear from today's discussion is that there's no doubt that the panelists that we have today are true experts in this field. And they're definitely undoubtedly the go-to experts within East Africa when it comes to navigating the complexities of deepfake technology. I really do hope the audience now has a deeper understanding of the multifaceted approach that is required to address these challenges. So I'd like us to go into the Q&A session, which I think will keep very brief. And then after the Q&A session, we will close our session. Thank you for my panelists for really keeping time because we are right on time. So I'm looking through the Q&A session. Maybe I will leave this to any speaker can pick this. There's a question asked by Philip about, thank you to the presenters. This is fascinating. How do you spot a deepfake aside from the outrageous ones, like the singing president's video that you showed us? Any of my panelists can pick that out. Dr. Kakoza.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. So I like the question that came in from Mr. Philip Karugaba, my former lecturer. So yes, it's interesting. A deep may a situation if someone were to watch the video we started with, this didn't happen. I mean, all the kind of people that are there cannot be in the same room. So yes, you'd spot that out as a deep fake. But then there are other situations where my mother sends me a WhatsApp message and says, I'm shocked at what President Biden said when he was still president. And then I tell her, no, that was a deep fake video. And you have to convince her that it was deep fake. So the situations vary. But pull them down. So now that's more about a liability question. So when we turn to the law, we have, like I said during my presentation, we shouldn't focus so much on property side of this because there's little much that intellectual property legal regimes can do for the deepfake problems that we have, but more into the cyber regulation. East African community cyber laws all have specific clauses that bring provider liability. And like I had said, the general position is that internet service providers that we use to access deepfake videos cannot be liable. There's a ton of case law that says they're generally not held liable. Liability comes in where you contact them and ask them to strike down or they do not do so. So Act, it specifies this very clearly, that if the service provider has been informed about some infringing material or defaming material and they do not do it, so that's where you can hold them liable. But you can also turn to the computer misuse legislations and consider this as being spread. So that also has criminal liability there as well. So that's the direct answer to the question.
Thank you for that, Dr. Kakoza. So then following up to that, Dr. Kakoza, do you then think that, and I know most panelists have touched on this, on the need for the existing legal system to also evolve a bit to accommodate these emerging technologies. Do you think our legal system will evolve fast enough to address this growing threat, or given that you've been an expert in this emerging area space for a long time, or how do you predict it will go?
So another thing we have to appreciate is that extent are created by artificial intelligence, and there's hardly any AI regulation in many countries. I mean, we have the EU, just now a few months old, and a few countries are trying to. Your question is that the law is always trying to catch up with artificial intelligence, and the same way the law is always just doing catch up with deep fakes. This is where the institutions behind them have just been asked to take them off the online platforms on which they are. Dr. Kathy mentioned specific states in the US where they're coming up with regulations, and that's a good step. We can pick from that and see how the law works. But what I do know from my experience, find such issues or practices have moved on to another state, which still leaves a gap. So self-regulation becomes the better alternative. And self-regulation in this sense is the IT service providers should have mechanisms that can be used through technology to address technological situations. So basically it's technology fighting technology as opposed to using the law to fight technology.
Thank you for that. So Sunday, in your opinion, do you think so if someone's likeness is misused for deepfake, say without their consent, do you think it would be ideal for them to pursue an IP claim, or would it be more appropriate, in your opinion, to handle it through, say, privacy or defamation law? Because throughout the conversation, as many panelists bring out the different avenues that can be used to address this. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Catherine. So my thoughts, looking at what the panelists have said, looking at what Doctor has said, and what I has presented. My background in IP and in when you are talking of privacy and data, I think we have more leverage when we go through the personal data route or when we criminalize using the Cyber Crimes Act. I think that is more faster and more convenient, looking at the fact that they are computer generated in terms of programs, but also we're dealing with sensitive data, people's data, of which personal data protection acts like ours and the regulations are very clear. You see, and they're imposing those obligations against the controllers. So I believe we have more leverage using those two rather than using IP. Yes, we can leverage for image rights and one, but I think we have more leverage using these two, of which are like more modern and they are more controversial. Like what the EU is doing now, they are more aligning around those areas as well, which are pertaining to computer systems and the likes and data as well.
I see your sense. Pius, do you think there can be a balance between free speech and protecting individuals from malicious deepfakes? And what role do social media platforms play in this regulation?
Sorry, Catherine, the balance
So
between?
So the question to you is, do you think there can be a balance between free speech and protecting individuals from malicious deepfakes? Throughout the conversation, I think most panelists keep bringing up this thing of striking a balance between free speech, innovation, because remember, free speech is also a right that most constitutions provide to its citizens, and also on this other end, protecting individuals from malicious deepfakes. Do you think there can be a balance? And what role do you think social media platforms play to achieve that balance?
Well, like I said in the beginning, I think there should be a balance. And as I said, even in the Constitution, whether you have a right of freedom of expression and freedom of information, is always restrictions and to what extent. So if the extent is that you shouldn't be sharing deep fakes that could have an impact on the rights of other individuals, then that right is restricted by the cyber laws, like my colleague said. But in my personal opinion is, especially with these new technologies, because something is still very new to everyone, it should be handled with caution and slowly, basically. And what was the intention of maybe sharing the deep fakes that have an impact on person's identity or person's business? For example, what I've seen in Rwanda, we have the Rwanda Investigations Bureau. All the time, if something like that happens, someone who shares such a deep fake is called and cautioned and many times told the position of the law to avoid such things. But yes, there's freedom of expression, but there are limits to that. Thank you.
Okay. Kathy, you mentioned, you gave us very many examples of what is happening in different jurisdictions around the world. And considering the global nature of the internet, do you then think that we should address it from an international cooperation point when it comes to regulating deepfakes? For example, should East Africa, is it better in having a joint effort as opposed to individual countries putting out the individual efforts? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Yes, of course. Oh, sorry, my video. Yeah. So yes, of course, it will be more effective having some sort of a protocol or some sort of initiative. But remember also the what is it? This doctrine of sovereignty of states in terms of domesticating whatever
Yeah, laws.
policy, whatever policy trust comes along. So there'll still be a need for a domestic legislation in as much as there's this global and regional initiatives. So I feel like the global and regional initiatives can give the policy framework, can give maybe other things. But in terms of criminalizing, we have different judicial systems. There's a civil system, there's a criminal system. We are not at the same level in terms of maybe development and so on. So I feel there still be a need for a domestic legislation. And I think we could benchmark things like money laundering, which
Yeah.
the money laundering law was, it's a global issue, and there have been all these global initiatives. But at the very end of the day, each country could maybe had to come up with a domestic law, a basis on which maybe even our criminal courts can, the way they set the maximum
Yeah.
sentence and whatnot, all that. Yeah, so I feel like both initiatives, global, regional, and then domesticating, I think that would work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, a concerted effort. Okay. Davis, I'll let you end it for us by telling us what you think your predictions are. We've discussed one issue in emerging tech. Where do you think this deepfake revolution is going? That's not even a legal question. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Thank you once again. I believe with the evolving nature of technology and as the digital world moves forward, there's going to be an instance where deepfake, as earlier said, will be used in various instances. For example, for education purposes and teachings on history, commerce, and other useful purposes. However, also deepfakes also pose another challenge on misinformation and fraud. An instance where you receive a phone call as a bank, a person working in the bank, you receive a call that someone impersonating or with the use of deepfake authorizing the withdrawal of certain amounts of money. So that is a challenge that comes with deepfake. So, and as they say, desperate times calls for desperate measures. We have seen Microsoft come up with actually Microsoft are working on various deepfake detection tools. Even though deepfake is hard to detect, there are various methods, casually and technologically. Technologically means I was looking at how Microsoft are trying to do it by use of things called fingerprints and watermarks that tend to detect how what is a deep fake and what is an authentic video. But basically, we can, as time goes through looking at how the person in the deepfake behaves, for example, looking at the skin texture of a person, how the lip syncs, and how the speech comes out. For example, a deepfake speech will not have the normal human pauses and breathing moments when when the person is talking. It will just be something continuous, on and on. And also, one might tend to look at the skin of a person and the hair of a person seems to be blurry. It might not be visible in the video that was shared earlier on, but in various videos that we can see, you will see that a person's hair and skin is blurry and so on. So what it means for the future of deepfake and AI at large is that there needs to be a more robust measures, more robust tools in terms of detection though the creators might be way ahead of our time in terms of detection, but we need to be so up to date with the evolving nature of artificial intelligence in terms of deepfakes. That is all I wish to say.
Thank you very much, Davis, for ending that conversation for us. Thank you very much to our audience today, a very engaging audience. And thank you to my panelists for such an engaging and insightful discussion. Thank you, Davis, Dr. Kakoza, Sunday, Dr. Kathy, and Pius. And sorry for butchering your name, Pius. That will not happen again. But ladies and gentlemen, as we've seen today, deepfakes are a growing threat with significant implications for the law, business, and society. But as our panelists have also brought out, it's a double-edged sword, and it should be handled by lawmakers and alike, like all other emerging technologies have been handled that have both benefits and cons. We're going to end today's session here, and let us know if you should have a 2.0. This topic is wide and very interesting. But thank you everybody for making it such an interesting conversation. And until next time, have a good afternoon and a good evening.
Good evening.